This is very much like these radically mislabeled free trade agreements. It's a lot of talk about job flow and stuff like that, which nobody can estimate, and it's kind of the minor factor anyhow. The major factor is just the threat. The threat that jobs can move is enough to drive down wages and working conditions in the wealthier countries, and good behavior is meanwhile guaranteed elsewhere by terror and repression that American taxpayers pay for, so that they can undercut their own jobs and harm plenty of other people, as well as by driving peasants into the urban labor force in third world countries by programs to force them into agro-export for American agribusiness, and by flooding the countries with subsidized U.S. farm products, what's called aid or food for peace by the more hypocritical commentators. Well, what all of this shows is that the famous slogan, "crime does not pay," is a total absurdity, in particular when a criminal state is behind it, and that's crucial here. The Reagan state made it very clear that it simply would not enforce the law, so that was carte blanche to employers to just carry out criminal actions. It's a straight criminal conspiracy. I don't use the term conspiracy very often, but this was a very clear and open criminal conspiracy between the substance, corporate America, and the shadow, which was more of a shadow than usual, and just said, yeah, go ahead and violate the law. We won't do a thing about it. Well, this illegal destruction of unions, Business Week points out still, is a major factor in lowering wages and in increasing the gap between the rich and the poor in the United States to Depression-era levels. It's reduced pension and health protection, and it's contributed to a 125-fold explosion in unlawful discharge suits. Why? Because the union protections that are guaranteed by law are gone. Similarly, safety regulations lapsed thanks to state employer cooperation in crime. The OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, I'm quoting Business Week now, under Reagan and Bush, OSHA was a hands-off agency encouraging lawlessness. And along with the dismantling of unions, that state involvement in criminal behavior led to an increase in days lost to injury from 58 per 100 workers in 1983 to 86 per 100 in 1991, which again shows that crime pays very well when the criminal state is crucially involved. Well, there were other consequences. This is one factor in the huge growth in profits, the huge increase in profits and concentration of wealth, which is indeed reaching new heights. Meanwhile, real wages, which stagnated in the 70s, started a steady decline around 1980, and they continue to decline. They've declined right through the latest figures, right through the Clinton recovery, so-called. For people with a high school education, wages have declined well over 20%, somewhere around 25%. That's the source of this angry white male phenomenon that people are talking about. They have plenty to be angry about. Unfortunately, the anger is focused at the shadow, not the substance, but that's the effect of very efficient and massive corporate propaganda. But the anger is real and justified. For college students, wages didn't start dropping until 1987, when the Reagan reforms really got into high gear, and they've been dropping since. This is noticed. The Wall Street Journal had a big article about it in 1992. They pointed out that from 1985, the United States had the highest labor costs in the world, which you'd expect in the richest society in the world. Should have much higher ones, in fact. But in 1985, as you expect, it would have the highest labor cost per unit output in the world. And in 1992, it was second lowest in the industrial world. Actually, in 1990, it was lowest of any country. But then Thatcher succeeded in smashing down the workforce in England even better than the Reaganites here, so the United States slipped back into second place in the competition to see who could harm working people more. So from 1985 to 1992, the United States went from highest labor cost to second lowest in the industrial world. And this was described by the Wall Street Journal as a welcome development of transcendent importance, as it is for their constituency. The business press, the rest of the business press describes other factors that are involved in this welcome development. The Financial Times of London, which is the big international business daily, they had an article about the same time about what was going on in Eastern Europe, and they described it as a horrible mess. Everything was awful, but the headline said that there's some hope. The headline was "Green Shoots in Communism's Ruins," meaning it's pretty bad, but there's some green shoots there, so some good things. The green shoots are what they described as the rising unemployment and pauperization of industrial workers under the reforms that the West is now imposing. And those are green shoots because it means that you can get workers in Poland, say, for 10% of the wages of the pampered Western workers. And as Business Week chimed in to say, that means it's a way to drive, it's another way, along with Mexico and Indonesia and so on. There's another tool now to force Western workers to abandon what Business Week calls their luxurious lifestyles. Of course, when GM moves to Poland or VW moves to Czechoslovakia, they believe in the really existing free market. So they demand very high tariff protections and public subsidies to pay them for doing this. Free markets, remember, for the poor. That's tough love, remember, not for the rich. They get state protection. But this is a tremendous weapon against working people by now around the world. That's called the globalization of production. You can see why Harvard professors and Jeffrey Sachs and so on are so delighted about free trade. It's really great for the sector that matters. For the pampered Western workers with their luxurious lifestyles, it may not be so great. And this goes across the board. So Daimler-Benz, Germany's biggest conglomerate, they can now move to Alabama, where they can get workers at third world standards with no labor protection and huge subsidies from the taxpayers of Alabama of exactly the kind that are given in the third world. And you can kind of whipsaw one labor force against another by these methods. That's another device alongside of the straight criminality of the state, as in the case of the Reagan years. All of this is well understood. The business press, let's go to Caterpillar and the Decatur strike. The business press has pointed out that Caterpillar, I'm quoting, is pursuing a business strategy that has nudged workers from defiance to compliance. Well, how'd they nudge workers from defiance to compliance? The technique was to build excess capacity in other countries, like, say, Brazil or Japan or Eastern Europe and so on, which means that when you have a strike in Decatur, you can supply your markets by overproduction elsewhere. That's alongside of hiring scabs and temporary workers and so on and so forth. Same is here. One of the big manufacturers left here is Gillette, and they have informed the business press that they are doing exactly the same thing. They're building excess capacity, even in Germany, which has a strong labor movement, hence much better wages and much lower working hours and more benefits and so on. So they're willing to do that. They are not for profits, but for class war. So they'd like to have an excess labor capacity in high wage places for the purpose of class war, because, as they explain, quite frankly, if there's a strike in Boston, they can supply European and American markets from their excess capacity that they've produced over there. There are other devices besides globalization and straight criminality to try to beat down the pampered Western workers. One of them was actually illustrated in headlines in the papers, the Globe and the Times, 2 or 3 days ago, when they said bonds surge as unemployment rises and growth falls. So, if you read the papers, you notice right in the front page now, nobody conceals it, that the thing that is most worrisome is when unemployment goes down and growth goes up. But when unemployment goes up and growth goes down, then the bond market surges. And that's very important. There are by now like around $1 trillion a day that circulate around in currency.